The Great Fire of 1910, also known as the Big Blow-Up. Imagine fighting fire for days, only to be overtaken by a wall of flame so intense that trees exploded, smoke darkened skies across the country, and dozens of firefighters died trying to stop it. That's exactly what happened in August 1910, when the Great Fire, known as the Big Blow-Up, ripped through the northwestern forest. Watch to the end to understand not just what happened, but how a single wildfire almost burned an entire state. Now, to understand the story better, we have to go back in time days earlier before the incident. The summer of 1910 had been brutal across the Northwest. Idaho, Montana, and parts of Washington were locked in a severe drought. Rain hadn't fallen in weeks. Forests were dry, dusty, and filled with leftover debris from heavy logging. Branches, stumps, and dead trees covered the ground, turning entire regions into fuel. Small fires were already burning everywhere. At the time, this wasn't unusual. Firefighters and local crews were stretched thin, trying to contain hundreds of minor blazes scattered across the mountains. Most of them were considered manageable, annoying, but dangerous. No one thought they were sitting on top of something historic, but the conditions kept getting worse. Temperatures stayed high, humidity dropped, and the winds began to pick up. By late August, the forests were so dry that a single spark could send flames racing uphill in seconds. Firefighters worked long days with almost no rest, digging fire lines by hand, cutting trees, and trying to stay ahead of fires that refused to die. Then came the warning signs. Winds grew stronger by the hour. Smoke thickened across valleys and towns. The sky took on a strange color, dark during the day, glowing at night from distant flames. Some firefighters later said it felt like the forest itself was holding its breath. And then on August 20th, 1910, everything changed. The winds didn't just increase, they exploded. What happened next would turn hundreds of small fires into a single unstoppable firestorm and bury an entire region under flame and ash. As night fell on August 20th, the wind reached terrifying speeds. Gusts ripped through mountain passes and valleys, funneling straight into forests. Small fires that had been separated by miles suddenly began moving toward each other, and then they merged. What firefighters were facing was no longer dozens of fires. It was one massive wall of flame stretching across the landscape. The fire moved faster than anyone thought possible. Trees didn't just burn, they exploded. Flames leapt hundreds of feet into the air. Burning embers were carried miles ahead of the main fire, starting new blazes wherever they landed. Communication broke down almost immediately. Crews couldn't see more than a few feet in front of them. Smoke was so thick it turned day into night. The sound of the fire was described as a freight train mixed with a hurricane. Constant, violent, and impossible to escape. Some firefighters tried to run. Others dropped their tools and headed for rivers, hoping water would protect them. A few dug shallow trenches into the dirt and lay flat, pressing their faces into the ground as the firestorm roared over them. Towns in the fire's path had almost no warning. Entire communities were suddenly surrounded by flames. Buildings caught fire within minutes. Rail lines twisted from the heat. People fled blindly, not knowing which direction was safe, because in many cases, none of them were. By the time the sun rose the next morning, entire forests were gone. But the fire wasn't done yet. What happened next would kill dozens of firefighters, wipe towns off the map, and leave scars on the land that would still be visible decades later. And this was only the beginning of what would become known as the Big Blow-Up. By the early hours of August 21st, the fire had grown completely out of control. The wind kept pushing it forward, faster and hotter, turning entire mountain ranges into one continuous blaze. Fire lines that crews had spent days digging were erased in seconds. Nothing slowed it down. Not rivers, not roads, not even open land. Firefighters were now fighting just so they could stay alive. Many crews were scattered across remote terrain with no clear escape routes. Some tried to regroup, only to realize the fire was already behind them. Others followed rail lines or streams, hoping they'd lead somewhere safe. In some cases, they didn't. Survivors later said the heat was unbearable even from a distance. Breathing became painful. The air itself felt like it was burning. Some firefighters dropped where they stood, overcome by smoke before the flames ever reached them. Entire towns disappeared overnight. Wallace, Idaho was nearly destroyed. Trains packed with refugees fled through smoke so thick the engineers couldn't see the tracks. In other areas, towns weren't as lucky. Buildings collapsed into ash. Homes burned down in their foundations. By morning, there was nothing left to save. When daylight finally broke, it revealed a landscape that looked unreal. Millions of acres were blackened. Hillsides still smoked. The sky stayed dark for days as ash drifted across the country. People hundreds of miles away reported blood-red sunsets and falling soot. And as the fires finally began to die down, the true cost started to come into focus. What they would find next shocked the nation and permanently changed how America would fight wildfires forever. So now, with a fire so huge it burned millions of acres and changed the landscape forever, the question is obvious. How does that place look today, more than a century later? Before we get there, though, we need to rewind just a little to the moments right after the fire finally died, because the reaction to the big blowup was almost as important as the fire itself. When the smoke began to clear in late August of 1910, the scale of destruction became impossible to ignore. Entire towns were gone. Railroads were twisted. Forests that once stretched for miles were reduced to blackened stumps and ash. Survivors wandered through ruins, searching for family members who never made it out. At least 87 people were confirmed dead, most of them firefighters. Many were buried where they fell. Others were never found at all. News of the disaster spread quickly across the country. Newspapers described skies darkened thousands of miles away. Ash fell as far as the East Coast. For the first time, Americans realized that wildfires weren't just local problems. They could be national disasters. The federal government couldn't ignore it. Until then, wildfire management in the U.S. had been disorganized and underfunded. Firefighters worked with basic tools, little training, and almost no coordination. The big blowup exposed how dangerous that approach was. In response, the government moved fast. The U.S. Forest Service was given more power, more funding, and a clear mission. Fires would be fought aggressively, no matter the cost. New policies were created. Fire suppression became the top priority. Crews were trained, organized, and sent deeper into forests than ever before. For the people who lived through it, life didn't simply return to normal. Entire communities had to be rebuilt from scratch. Many never were. Some towns disappeared permanently, leaving behind only foundations and names on old maps. And yet, nature didn't stay silent forever. Over the years, forests slowly began to grow back. Trees returned. Wildlife followed. From the air today, parts of Idaho and Montana look green and alive again, almost peaceful. But the scars are still there. Burn patterns from the fire can still be seen more than 100 years later. Old photographs, compared to modern images, show how uneven the recovery was. Some areas made a comeback, others never fully did. And here's the part most people don't realize. The policies created after the big blowup, the ones meant to stop fires at all costs, may have unintentionally made modern wildfires even worse. By suppressing natural fires for decades, forests grew thicker, denser, and more dangerous. Fuel piled up. So when fires break out today, they burn hotter, faster, and more violently. In a strange way, the Great Fire of 1910 never really ended. It lives on in the forests, in the policies, and in every massive wildfire that follows. And when you look back at what happened in those few terrifying days of August 1910, one thing becomes clear. This wasn't just a wildfire. It was a warning. Now, at that time, officials estimate the damage from the Great Fire of 1910 at around $1 billion. That number alone was hard to grasp in 1910. It was larger than the yearly budget of several U.S. states combined. But here's the part most people don't realize. Adjusted for inflation, that fire would have cost over $30 billion today, and that's just property and timber. It doesn't include long-term health damage, lost jobs, or the environmental fallout that would take decades to fix. Now imagine the same fire happening in today's world. In 1910, the region was mostly small towns, railroads, and logging camps. Today, that same area is packed with highways, power grids, cell towers, fuel pipelines, and dense housing developments. A fire moving at hurricane speed through modern infrastructure wouldn't just destroy homes, it would collapse entire regional systems. Communication would fail within hours. Major roads would become death traps. Emergency alerts wouldn't reach people fast enough because cell towers would be gone. Insurance losses alone would likely break records. For comparison, the 2018 Camp Fire, which destroyed one town, caused about $16.5 billion in damage. The Great Fire of 1910 wiped out dozens of towns at once across multiple states. In today's economy, experts estimate a similar event could push losses past $100 billion, making it one of the most expensive disasters in American history. And not just fires, but any disaster. And that's the scary part. The fire happened at once, but the conditions that allowed it to happen never really went away. Subscribe for more videos like this, and don't forget to check my latest video talking about another equally scary disaster. I'm Mickey V. Have a great day.